Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Upgrade Your Infrastructure and Make the Leap to ISO 20022 for your cross-border payments. And the focus for today's webinar will be on testing your CBPR Plus flows. And we have a pretty packed agenda for today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today for the last global ISO webinar of the year. And thank you again for tuning in and deciding to spend the next hour or so with us learning ISO. So agenda for today, what have we got for you? We'll start with a short introduction with an overview of the main timelines for the cross-border payments migration. So which messages are in scope? By when do you have to migrate them? And where do you need to start? So what should be your priority? Which messages should you be focusing on? Then a quick reminder on how to structure your ISO migration plan for successful execution of your project, and then focusing on building your actual testing approach. So which tools are available for you to use, how to set them up, what do they look like, and how to make the most out of the resources that you have. And finally, finish off with the useful resources and some links where you can find more information. So without further ado, let's begin with an overview of the key ISO 20022 initiatives. And just to give you a little bit more context before we dive into these 5 swim lanes. We started CBPR Plus coexistence period in March last year, so it's been over 1 year and a half so far. And the global ISO adoption rate currently stands at almost 30%. And based on the ISO adoption forecast, the community is broadly on track to adopt the ISO 20022 for 2025. However, there are lots of different messages in scope of the CBPR Plus, and messages like reporting, E&I, charges, checks, direct debits, where the community expressed they needed a little bit more time to adopt them. We see that especially the financial institutions who have their payment market infrastructures migrating to ISO next year, so their local RTGS migrations, the standards releases every year, other regulatory requirements like the instant payment legislation in Europe and so on. So here on the slide, we wanted to ensure that there is clarity on the various initiatives that are happening and how do they fit together in the context of each other. So where do you want to start and what should you be focusing on? And this nicely leads me to the first swim lane where the focus should be on the payment instructions. So priority should definitely be given to migrate your payment instructions that are your customer credit transfers, your MT103s, financial institution credit transfers that are your MT202s, and payment initiation relay messages that are your MT101s. So we urge everyone to complete the migration to the ISO alternatives of those messages by November 2025. Because from this date onwards, a couple of things will happen. So the first one, some of the MT messages in the payment initiation will be completely removed from the FIN network. So they will be nacked. And I'll go through the list, which messages those will be in the next slide. And then another thing, other MT messages in the payment initiation space will be subject to additional validation and significant financial disincentives that will escalate over time. And those are part of our contingency plan. So I won't spend too much time on the contingency plan itself, as we covered it in the previous webinar, and also there is more information that is coming out on that in the next month, especially on the pricing of it. So moving on to the second swim lane, which is all about capturing rich and structured data. So that mainly pertains to changes in the postal addresses requirements and introducing the hybrid option from November next year, and also removing the fully unstructured option from November 2026. Then we are moving into the third swim lane, which are exceptions and investigations. So this is all about migrating your ENI messages that in the MT world are the MT 199s, 95s, 96 into the ISO alternatives, which are CAMT 10, CAMT 11 messages. And this is really more than just a pure format migration and is driven by the rollout of the Swift Universal Case Management, where we want to make case available for the whole community. And with the introduction of the new ISO messages, CAMT 10, CAMT 11, we are reworking the whole ENI process to make it much quicker and much more efficient. So lots of exciting new developments are happening in this space with the help of our case pilot banks. And as per the current plan, the rollout of these new ISO messages will be gradual. So from early next year, there will be an early adopters group, which is a closed user group. So you are free to opt in if you wanted to participate and adopt case early. But then from November next year, you will be required to receive the CAMT 110. And from November 2026, you will be required not only to receive, but also to send the CAMT 11. So use both of those messages. And that's the date when the MT alternatives will be retired. Now, the remaining two swim lanes on this slide is for the non-instruction messages and for the corporate to bank flows. So first of all, non-instruction messages, those are other than the payment instruction messages. So your reporting messages, statements, checks, direct debits, charges, they will be supported after November 2025 in order for you to allow to focus your migration on the payment instruction messages. And finally, corporate to bank flows, which has never really been a mandatory part of the CBPR Plus migration, but we recognize it's an important piece of the puzzle, ensuring this smooth end-to-end payment journey, as that is where a lot of the cross-border payments begin. So there's definitely clear interoperability, compliance, and straight-through processing benefits in using ISO for the corporate to bank flows. But at this point, there is no end of coexistence date foreseen for the SCORE customers, and it's really up to the financial institutions to set their own timelines for the corporates to adopt ISO. And we do have a corporate strategy where we aim to assist with those flows, but that's a whole separate topic, and we have separate webinars that covers that topic as well. Now, moving into scope of the CBPR Plus messages. So here is a quick recap of all the MT messages in scope of the CBPR Plus migration and their ISO alternatives. So starting from the left-hand side, really important, the focus point is migrating your payment instruction messages by November 2025. So you see the first column, end of life NAC. So this is the list of messages that will be NAC'd from the network as soon as November 2025 deadline comes. So these are your MT101s, 102s, 102 STP, 103 remittance, 201, 203, simply because those messages don't have ISO equivalents. Now the next column, the remaining MT messages in the payment instruction space, these are your MT103s, 202s, 205s that you would have to migrate to PAX 8, PAX 9, 9COV, and so on. So these are all listed under the MT to MX conversion service, which I briefly mentioned. They will be part of the contingency plan that we will introduce from November 2025 in order to make sure that all the payment instructions circulating in the network are in ISO format. So for anyone not ready in time for November, we will be converting those MT messages to MX automatically. But there is always a but. It will come with a hefty charge. It's going to be a temporary solution, and it will have additional technical validations in place. So some of the empty messages might not be converted to MX, and therefore it may be nagged. So you really want to focus your time and energy to migrating those payment instruction messages to the ISO alternatives and not relying on the contingency plan as a last resort. Now moving to the next column of the exceptions and investigations related messages. So they will be deprecated but supported until November 2026. And these are your MT 1 and 299s, 96, 95s that you're currently using for the exceptions and investigations, and also stop and recall pair messages. So this column has a gradual rollout of the new ENI messages, but the deadline is set for November 2026. Now, looking at the remaining messages in the last two columns, those messages will be deprecated but supported past November 2025. So they don't really have a hard deadline set. And these are your reporting messages, checks, charges, direct debits, other common group and tracker messages that will be deprecated but supported past November 2025. So you still have to migrate them, but there is no hard deadline set, which may change, depending on the community consultations. Now, the most common question that I get from this slide is on the terminology. So what is the difference between removed, retired, and deprecated? They all sound very familiar, but what do they actually mean? So the first one, removed, is a very straightforward one, means any empty messages that have word removed from that deadline will be nagged on the network, no longer supported, nagged. Retired is slightly softer term, and meaning that they will not be nagged in the network, they will not be completely pulled out, but we expect the community to migrate to ISO. And here we are referring to the category 199 and 299 messages mainly, because they have, as a lot of you may know, a lot of different reasons why these messages are used. So they have multiple use cases where the community is using them for exceptions and investigations, part of it, for the tracker updates, bank to tracker updates, and everything else. So retired means they will still be allowed on the network. We won't nag them, but you have to analyze the use cases of what you're using these multi-format messages for, and then move to ISO alternatives for the relevant messages. And the third one, deprecated, means allowed on the network, but no longer maintained or enhanced by Swift. So everyone is really expected to migrate to the ISO equivalents. Now, moving on to your readiness for November 2025 of the migration plan. So this is really a step-by-step journey that looks a little bit like a snake of 10 different segments and represents main activities in your ISO migration project. Of course, these activities and where you are in your project will vary from bank to bank. And today we are going to be zooming in into step 6 and 7, which is all about testing, making sure that you know which resources, which tools you can use, what do they look like, how to make the most out of them, and you have your test plans ready. So we assume that majority of you would have completed the first 5 steps already. If not, those are really first one, familiarizing yourself with the CBPR Plus learning materials, usage guidelines, doing your initial and impact assessments, where you identify the affected business processes, back office applications, maybe any gaps in the existing workflows, and develop a project plan to take all those areas into account and how CBPR Plus migration will impact them. Then you have the steps 5, 6, and 7, really important ones, creating your functional specifications, technical implementations, and test, doing lots of testing. Step number 8 is firming up the migration plan, outlining the specific go live test as well as the contingency plans, and communicating migration timelines to internal stakeholders, customers, and partners. And after you've done all that, step number 9 is actually the go live. So that includes monitoring the migration process and addressing any issues that may arise. Hopefully not. And also conducting the post-implementation review to assess the success of the migration and also identify any areas of improvement, which leads us nicely to final step number 10, which is all about continuous improvements and also getting ready to migrate other messages in scope of the CBPR Plus. And now let's take a look at the key principles for building a good test approach and ensuring that your project delivers on quality. First of all, why do you need a structured testing and testing in general in the first place? So some of the benefits includes early detection of potential errors, and faster and cheaper resolution times. And this is why testing teams need to be involved early in the project lifecycle. Also important to include multiple types of testing because they each bring their own benefits. And another very important aspect is to leave enough time for the testing activities instead of trying to squeeze them late into the project. So early preparation provides valuable inputs into analysis, design, and implementation activities. Now, these are only some of the benefits of testing, but what I really wanted to highlight is a couple of points on the right-hand side, where we have gathered some observations and pieces of advice from the banks that have successfully migrated to ISO. So a couple of things to highlight here. A lot of the institutions tend to focus on the plain vanilla flow, so just happy flows, overlooking not so happy flows and other cases, and as well maybe sometimes overlooking some of the other applications that are involved. So when you test, think about your end-to-end payment flow and all the applications that are involved. So we also noticed there were differences in the interpretation of certain rules or values that need to be populated in certain fields. And that led to misinterpretation of the usage guidelines. So these can be uncovered prior to going live exactly through thorough counterparty and community testing activities. Another point to bring up also, some institutions had not configured or not correctly configured their FinPlus interface, which in turn resulted in the abort messages going back to the sender. So if your FinPlus interface is not configured correctly, you will simply not be able to receive the CBPR plus messages coming into you, and they will bounce back, come back to the sender, and that will result in a poor customer experience, of course. So, however, all the institutions that have successfully migrated to CBPR plus are really agree on one thing. They're unanimous on one thing. And the thing is that testing cannot start early enough. And this is really the key in learning and gaining insights for a smooth adoption. So some principles to follow when building your test approach. So a couple of things I like to mention here. So first thing to remember is that there were minimum action points that you had to complete prior to March 2023 go live date. So all financial institutions are expected to be able to receive CBPR Plus messages since that date, since March 2023, because your correspondents can migrate to ISO on their own timeline, and they can start sending you CBPR Plus messages without really checking with you or informing you. Is once they're ready to send the payment messages in ISO, they can start doing that. So your Finplus interface has to be configured correctly so that you are able to receive those CBPR Plus messages either in a multi-format which is MX with embedded MT, and this is really the default configuration. Or if you don't need the MT part, you can change that configuration to receive only MX messages. So then you're able to receive only messages in ISO, you don't need the MT bit, and all your systems are able to handle that. So that's the first step to complete. And I'm sure most of you have completed, but if not, please do that quite urgently. The next one on the list is getting ready for the next deadline, which is the November 2025. And this is where you should be prioritizing your payment instruction messages, migrating to their ISO alternatives. So think about your MT103s, 202s, PAX8, PAX9. And that's the second part, the next deadline of November 2025. Now, also take into account the non-functional testing as well. Since CBPR Plus messages are significantly larger than their MT counterparts, so make sure you think about doing some performance testing. And also those messages are exchanged in a different messaging service, so not on Fin, so take into account continuity and other operational aspects. And finally, prioritize activities based on your business needs. So if you're one step ahead and you've done the migrated your messages, look at the next ones on the timeline. Now, quick overview on the different types of testing tools that are available for you to use that can help you along the way. So we separate them mainly into two blocks: off the network testing tools and on the network testing tools. So for the off the network testing tools, we mainly talk about my standards and the three resources that are available there, which is a readiness portal, translation portal, and the sample libraries. And these are to help you validate the structure and the content of the CBPR Plus messages that you will be using. So when we talk about this type of testing, we normally refer to it as standards testing. And these are really all the resources that you can find on my standards. And this is what I will be showing you in the next couple of slides, what they look like, how can you access them, what's the main logic. And for the remaining testing resources on the network, so the self-service testing using TSP, Test Sparring Partner, doing the community testing, we will not have enough time to cover those today, but we will organize a separate webinar in January to cover those resources. So if you find this content useful, do look out for the new date and tune back in for the second part where I'll be covering the on the network testing resources. And before we jump into my standards, just the last slide on the assembling the right team for your project, which should consist of more than just testers. So we recommend you to include your senior management, who will be the sponsoring the program management, so they are on board and supportive. Also, the payment analyst that should also be involved, as they can normally provide useful feedback or advice on the preparation, execution, and interpretation of the test results. And don't forget your Swift administrators who manage access to Swift applications and also can help debugging and possibly adapting the Swift stack configuration based on the testing activities that are evolving. So going back to off the network testing block and looking into my standards, where your testing activity should begin in order to validate the structure and the content of the CBPR Plus messages. So there are mainly 3 resources on my standards that I want you to be familiar with, and those are the readiness portal, where you can validate the structure of the CBPR Plus message. Second one is the translation portal, where you can learn and test CBPR Plus translation rules, and those could be MT to ISO, ISO to MT, so both ways. And the third one, library of CBPR Plus sample messages to support your learning and internal testing activities. So just to give you an idea, if you ever need any sample messages, what they look like, what the structure is, you can easily access them. So starting with the readiness portal, where you can validate the structure and content of your messages against the CBPR Plus usage guidelines. So this is done offline, meaning that the message is not sent to Swift network. And how you access it is by going into the main CBPR Plus landing page and clicking on the CBPR Plus usage guidelines and readiness portal. So what, number 1. Now, you may need to request access in order to access this, but it should be pretty quick and straightforward. Also note that with the readiness portal, there are several readiness portals available within the CBPR Plus group on my standards, as you can see on the button number 2, as they normally pertain to the standards release cycles. So the first one on the list, CBPR Plus SR 2024 combined, is the one that you should be using until 2025 version becomes available in March next year. So in other words, this is the readiness portal that is live on FinPlus from this November until next. So this is the new baseline. So this is the one you should be using. Now below there is the CBPR Plus SR 2023 combined, which is what was on the FinPlus for last year. And also you can see the next 2 ones, SR 2025, 2026 advanced release, which are sort of previews and they mainly retain to the context of the hybrid postal addresses, so the changing requirements in the postal addresses, the hybrid option that will become available from November 2025, and the removal of the unstructured addresses from November 2026. Now, once you click on the readiness portal, there will be a number of messages that are available for you to test. So select one that you want to test, as an example on this slide, PAC 002, and you have 3 possible input screens. So the first one, you can upload a single message. Number 2, you can upload a zip file. And the option number 3, you can manually type paste the message into the text box. And the Readiness portal automatically validates your message against the CBPR Plus usage guidelines and shows you the results with a description of the errors. So from the results screen, you can directly edit the message if you want to, or you can upload the new one and rerun the validation. And now moving into the translation portal, which also has the CBPR Plus translation rules. And again, this is also done offline. The message is not sent on the Swift network, and you can access in a very similar way as with the Readiness portal from the CBPR Plus landing page on My Standards. You just click on the CBPR Plus translation portal. And unlike the Readiness portal, there is only one instance of the translation portal. So it always covers the full set of messages for which the CBPR Plus translation rules and libraries are available. And the experience is somewhat similar to Google Translate, well, where you type paste the input message on the left-hand side, and then you see the results on the right-hand side. So you can further edit the message on your left, and you can see the impact of how that changes in real time on the right. And moving on to the samples libraries, where you can find some CBPR Plus sample messages. Again, they are also located on the CBPR Plus main landing page. And there are two types of libraries. So there is the libraries that you can see on the left that contain samples of the use cases illustrated in the CBPR Plus user handbook, which also the user handbook itself, you can also get it from My Standards. And the libraries on the right contain samples of the multi-format messages. So the MX with embedded MT, the translated MT, as delivered by the Inflow translation service on the Fin Plus. So if you do want to test out the Inflow translation service and take a look at what that may look like, it gives you some examples. And when you click on the samples libraries, you can download. It downloads into a zip file, and that zip file contains an XML for each of the message, where you can see the structure, and also it has the PDF for more use cases. And that pretty much wraps up all the available resources on My Standards, the Readiness portal, translation portal, and the samples libraries. So for the next couple of minutes, I wanted to take you through some of the useful resources that are really worth bookmarking. So first one is the new playlist available on Swift Smart. So this is something that we have launched very recently. And basically these playlists that we have pre-recorded, and they are just smaller size segments of the content that we cover in the past webinars. And this is what we're going to do with this webinar as well. Instead of just posting the whole recording, we break it down into smaller chunks. We pre-record them, put it on Swift Smart, so you have the content, you have the slides, but broken into smaller segments, so you can choose what you want to replay, what you want to listen to. And we also have, we also will be translating these playlists into different languages, so we'll have them available in Spanish, French, Russian, Mandarin, and I think Japanese. Now, a quick reminder on the community trainings for ISO and CBPR Plus provided by our consulting team. So these are virtual and in-person training sessions available in different regions depending on your location, where you are based, and depending on the topics that you want to improve your knowledge on. So this is a really good way to organize your resources, to strengthen the knowledge of the CBPR Plus, whether it's use guidelines, whether it's more technical. And you do have all these resources really on SwiftSmart, Swift.com, the Knowledge Center. You can go through all of these documentations and do it yourself. But the benefit of the community trainings is that you can gather all your project people that you want to brush up their skills on CBPR Plus, and you've got the live person from Swift that is running the sessions, and you've got the opportunity to raise any questions, raise any concerns, and get the answers there and then. So something that we get a lot of positive feedback on. And back to SwiftSmart training. So there is lots of content on SwiftSmart and different modules on the CBPR Plus, whether it's different message flows separated by topic, or whether it's a whole series conducted into from different modules, whether you want to just to maybe deepen the general understanding of the CBPR Plus guidelines. So these are just few examples that are most used on the SwiftSmart. And stay up to date with the CBPR Plus related communications. So make sure that you have your Swift.com profile updated by selecting ISO 20022 under the standards category to make sure that you don't miss out any of our communications. As we release new documentation, we update the old documentation, release new white papers and things like that on a regular basis. And as a final reminder on the key takeaways before closing and opening a Q&A session, the first point is to make sure that you're capable of receiving the CBPR Plus messages today. Since March 2023, any of your correspondents can start sending you payment instructions in ISO, and you have to be ready to have your FIM Plus interface configured correctly to be able to receive those messages. Then the next step is to focus on testing and migrating your payment instruction messages to be ready for the next deadline of November 2025. And also in your testing approach, make sure that you incorporate the non-functional testing as well. And as a final step, make sure to mobilize a strong testing team early enough in the project lifecycle and leave plenty of time for the testing to happen. And I think one last slide that I've already mentioned, we will have a second part of this testing webinar happening in January. We still have not firm up to date, but we will in the coming weeks. So it will be posted on Swift.com on the webinar section, the usual place. And the second part will cover on the network resources that include self-testing, how to use the test sparring partner, and the resources on the community testing to help you coordinate that better. And with that, I'll open the floor to Marcos if there were any questions that you wanted to reiterate or review.
Hey, Egla. Yeah, actually, we had a lot of really good questions. Hopefully, my answers were helpful. I'll just start kind of from the top. I mean, there was a little confusion around what's retired, what's removed, what's deprecated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to kind of highlight that. I tried to highlight that removed means at that point in time, they will no longer be able to send the old MT. And that retired means, for example, in the use case of the 199s and 299s, for exceptions and investigations. So they will be seen as retired for that use. So we would expect the community no longer to send them for exceptions and investigations, but that message hasn't been removed because those free-form messages could be used for other things like the GPI tracker, et cetera. And that deprecated means from 2025, the old version, the old MT message will no longer be updated. So, typically we could do updates every year. It will no longer be updated, but there may be updates to the ISO equivalent. So keep an eye on that. What
Very good
else? There
point,
was a little.
Marcos. So basically, think about removed as NACT on the network from that specific date, and retired is a softer version still allowed, but you're expected to migrate to ISO because those particular messages have multi-format and they use for many cases other than payments related as well when we talk about MT199s, 299s.
Yeah, then the next big group of messages was around the contingency measure. So I call it two sides of the coin, right? So if after November 2025, everyone's expected to send ISO and receive ISO, the one side of the coin is you still can't receive pure ISO. You need the inflow translation. So the inflow translation will be chargeable and allowed after November 2025. The pricing is going to be published on the Swift price list in January. The other side of the coin is this new conversion service where if you're not able to produce an ISO message and you need to send out still the MTs for a short period of time, if they follow the validation rules that we just finished publishing on my standards, then they need to go ahead and make sure that the source message follows those validation rules. And again, for a short period of time, for a lot of costs, we will turn those MTs into ISOs. Questions around my standards. Is it chargeable? How do they get access to it? So I basically said, you go to my standards on the top. There's a link to CBPR Plus. You click on that. If you've never been there before, it'll ask you to request access to the CBPR Plus portal that Egla shared. Once you get access to the portal, you'll have two additional access requests. One to look at the usage guidelines, so to look at what these ISO messages look at for CBPR Plus, and another one to look at and use a translation portal, which includes the sample messages. So 3 clicks for permissions, but available to everyone except vendors. So all financial institutions will have access to the portal in general, will have access to the usage guidelines, will have access to the translation portal. Vendors will have access to the CBPR Plus portal, the usage guidelines, but not the translation portal and those mapping rules. There was one more deeper dive around what versions of the messages. I have to warn everybody to please be careful with this. A lot of people become easily confused and say, oh, the latest version of ISO is version 10, so I should download the packs and the camps in version 10. That's not what we're doing. And then people are like, okay, well, for CBPR Plus, it's PAX 8 version 8 and Camp 53 version 6. So go to the CBPR Plus portal, go to the usage guidelines. There is a distinct version of each of those messages that starts with the name CBPR Plus underscore. So you have to use the CBPR Plus underscore Paxo 8, the CBPR Plus underscore Paxo 9, the CBPR Plus underscore Camp 53, etc. I say that because they have market practices that were put in place by the Payments Market Practice Group and for cross-border payments and reporting, things like only allowing one message at a time. So please, look at the documentation in my standards, the user handbook. Please take as many of the Swiss Smart modules as possible because there's a lot of room for confusion. And in addition to that, as Egla mentioned, we do provide these community trainings, which are of great help to everyone to establish a good core foundation of the messages. And we cover how a CBPR Plus CAM 52 is different from the standard CAM 52 that you could also find on Swift on my standards.
But that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. It's a question that comes up quite a few times on the versioning. So maybe we'll include something to guide you through on that.
One question just came in about FileAct. So FileAct is not impacted. However, the messages that we are migrating for CBPR Plus do not currently get sent in FileAct. They get sent on what we call the FIN many-to-many service. So you send the MT103s in the FIN many-to-many service. Now you will send the Paxo 8 in the FIN Plus many-to-many service. FileAct is used in SCORE as a way of sending any message. You could also send an MT in FileAct if you're in SCORE. You should send an MT via FIN if you're in SCORE. And I think Egla covered in the swim lanes in the beginning that for now we are not pushing anyone to do any changes in the corporate to bank space. So there are really no changes to the SCORE closed user group. We are alongside bringing up something called SCORE Plus, which is additional functionality, but that's not part of this migration for 2025, and not what we're discussing in this session. Yeah, will the translation portal become available for vendors, Swift partners currently? It is available for a charge. So depending on what you need to use the translation portal for, or what you would need to use those libraries for, that is chargeable. You would need to talk to your account manager at Swift. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions, but I think I may have covered everything. I did highlight, there was a question around the test environment. So one thing that we didn't talk about, we have, and I think it's part of the next webinar on testing, when we talk about Test Sparring Partner, but we do have a lot of documentation on the Knowledge Center landing page. I think you show it at the end, where we show all the links to the documentation. So if you have questions about testing, please avail yourself of that Knowledge Center page. There's a lot of documentation on hooking into the test environments, as Egla was saying, activating your production FinPlus messages into you. So there's some of this operational communications, etc. So there's a lot of information on Swift.com, and specifically the Knowledge Center, and there's a dedicated landing page for ISO, which I included in the chat.
And we'll include more specific resources in the next part of the webinar that we'll hold in January to cover on the network testing resources that are available too, which makes more sense to include them there.
I think we just got a new one that says something worth mentioning is the business service uses identifier that will change for specific messages impacted by the structured address change. So yeah, so please, there is a lot of documentation on structured addresses. There is, this is very detailed for a session like this, but again, please avail yourselves of the documentation, the SwiftSmart modules, because, for example, like the PAX 08, there's a business service that'll indicate that's a PAX 08 SDP. The PAX 09, it's a different business service. Is it a regular PAX 09 or is it a PAX 09 Cup? So very detailed, but yeah, we really don't have time for that level of detail, but great questions, because people are involved and engaged from the looks of it. Fed ISO, which is going live in March, can we use Swift ISO schema instead of Fed? No. Fed has their own schema. They have their own testing requirements. You must be looped into them as a member of the Fed. Everything we cover here is only Swift and cross-border payment CBPR plus relevant. I'm not sure I have access to Swift Smart to view the recordings. If you are part of an organization that is a Swift member with a BIC, you need to speak to your Swift.com administrator in your organization, because all members of the organization should be able to access Swift Smart once given access by your administrator.
Yeah, so as soon as you created a Swift.com account, you then can access Swift Smart, Knowledge Center, so all these platforms completely free of charge, where we host a lot of the good materials.
Yeah, and there's another question about will corporate to bank flows be subject to translation costs if they continue to use MT101 payment? So again, it's a separate initiative. It's called SCORE Plus. We at Swift are standing it up for our banks to use. If you're a bank that's interested in giving access to SCORE Plus to your corporates, then please contact your account manager. There's a whole process for doing that. Again, the standards of the messages are different from the CBPR Plus messages, are different from the core ISO messages. So it's a whole. I believe we also had some webinars on the SCORE Plus ISO for corporates that you can also look at in my standards.
We'll include some links. Yeah, we'll make sure to include some links to those webinars on the SCORE Plus and the corporate strategy.
If we have any questions, is there a Swift mail ID we can send mail to? I would just suggest that you send them directly to your account manager, because sending them to generic email addresses can get a little tricky. But worst comes to worst, go to Swift.com. Like I said, it's flashing on the first page, ISO for financial institutions. Drill down into those pages, and there should be a way to send an email with questions if you don't know who your account manager is. The last one is a very technical question from Tina Lemos around the version of the business service usage identifier. I would have to look at what we have in standards. But again, if something is going to change from a .02 to a .03, that's always shared a year in advance at this time of year. So go to the My Standards Swift.com standards section, standards changes for next year, and see if those again, business services and usage identifiers are being updated. I don't feel anything will change between now and 2025 just for the sake of sanity. So one's a very complicated one about a service tag. I don't know the answer for that. So if you have specific questions about the structure of the messages after reviewing the usage guidelines and the user handbook, please open a support case that can get routed to our standards team for clarification. I think that's it for now. So thank you all for being very engaged and for these great questions. And again, tune in. We'll have many more webinars between now and November and after. So this is a great forum. Again, if you haven't taken the ISO trainings in the ISO community trainings, again, please go to swift.com and find out where those are available in your area. And if you would like them in your area or in your country, then please go ahead and speak to your account manager about scheduling some of those. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes. And once again, thank you everyone for tuning in, listening, putting your questions, and wishing you all great rest of the day. And thank you.